First, a little bit of general housekeeping before we continue with the series. There are already several good tutorial videos for Rust on YouTube. Those videos tend to teach you about the specific of the language rather than how to be a software engineer. This series is geared towards someone who is brand new to software engineering or somebody who comes from a design background, who has a little bit of CSS, HTML, maybe a little bit of JavaScript, but now they want to learn a system level bare metal language that's fast and has a lot of power and can be used for web development like Rust. My approach is a project-based learning approach. Instead of telling you, oh, this is a variable, this is how you use a variable, etc., we actually use a variable in a project-based context, which will help you learn it in a practical sense. Yes, at the beginning there's some abstraction, but I find that this practical approach, this project-based learning approach, you tend to retain a lot more, especially for people who are new to software engineering. In this episode, I want to dive into the human decision-making process in the context of Rust development and, for example, how one would choose to use an external crate like random number generator. In this particular instance, I know that I need to generate random number, okay? So the thing that I look at first is the documentation, the official Rust documentation itself. So the first thing I do is I go to the Rust standard library documentation and I type in, let's just type in random and see what you get. So my only return is something called random state. It's interesting, but that's probably not what I need. How about random number generator? Nothing there. Okay, so my next step is to see if in the crates there are anything that I can use. How about random number generators? Okay, so this is pre-sorted by relevance. Okay, so the first one is random number generator. That looks interesting. Has an all-time download high of 128, recent download 15. It was updated a year ago. Let's see if we can do better. Oh wow, look at this one. 38 million downloads, over 38 million download, and recently 5 million, almost 6 million download, and was updated 7 months ago. Let's try this one and see what they have. Now you can certainly spend the time to look at all of this and go to the link and such, but let's, for the brevity's sake, let's go to documentation. Now I mentioned in the previous video that this was a trait. So if you look at the side panel here, see it says trait. Here, obviously you can read through this, but let's look at the traits. Look at that, random thread RNG. Let's click into that. And then it gives you an example, okay? So that's how I came about that decision. This is obviously a very trite example, but hopefully you get the idea here. Try the documentation and look at the example. And then you can base your decision after looking at the documentation and looking at your options. I also want to go back to the crates and tell you something about the crates. So I mentioned in the previous video that the crates here are tested and vetted, right? Yes, that's true. However, sometimes they're not perfect, right? Sometimes you can have a version mismatch where a certain version of one crate or a certain version of Rust will not work with certain crates. Okay, so that's why it is important to have this cargo log file to have consistent build with the correct version. Okay. And one more thing before I say goodbye for this episode. I want to sort of define, at least in my opinion, uh, the term software engineering or software engineer as related to the profession. Sometimes you hear the people say uh, a programmer, a computer programmer, or a web developer or a software developer or software engineer. What's the difference? To some people, they all mean the same. But for me, the difference between a programmer and a software engineer is that a software engineer can do everything that a programmer can do. However, a software engineer can also develop algorithms and data structures and tools and framework for programmers to use, especially in the context of a system level language like Crate. Okay, so in my opinion, that's how I define the difference between a programmer and a software engineer. That's all for now. I'll see you next time where we get back to the coding. Thank you.